Hi there. I'm your host, Marlene McConnell, and welcome to the Surviving Trauma Stories of Hope podcast. In this week's episode, I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Eugene Lipov and Jamie Mustard to the podcast. Dr. Lipov is a complex anesthesiologist, also known as the Einstein of modern anesthesiology. Jamie is an artist, multimedia consultant, and iconist. In their recently released publication, The Invisible Man outlines how the root of trauma can be traced to a single piece of human hardware, a stellate ganglion, and how the pioneering procedure of DSR appears to treat injury to the stellate ganglion, relieving even the worst symptoms of PTSI, irritability, hypervigilance, insomnia, and more in a 15-minute treatment. Weaving hard science with moving human stories, The Invisible Machine reveals a stark new understanding of human pain and how this groundbreaking treatment was developed. It also tells the incredible story of the unlikely team, including the doctor, an artist, special forces leadership, and a sheriff who work together to change our understanding of post-traumatic stress and why it matters to society. Coming out of a global pandemic, we are emerging from one of the most traumatic times in recent history. This surprising new treatment could have profound implications for medicine, mental health, and society. The implications for a better, pain-free world are astounding, and that world could be nearer than we think. It has been my pleasure hosting this episode with Dr. Lipov and Jamie. Thank you to my listeners for joining me on this journey. Comment on the posts on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn and let me know what you think. Head to Amazon.com or takealot.com and get your copy of my book, Ray of Light, and please leave me a rating and review. It would mean the world to me. Also, please check out my website and download your free journal and relaxing meditation. As always, stay tuned and keep listening. So welcome, Dr. Eugene Lipov and Jamie Mustard to Surviving Trauma Stories of Hope. I am so happy to have you here. How are you doing?
Great.
I'm doing great. It's a good day.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us on. It's early in the morning here, but I'm doing well.
Awesome. So for the listeners, Dr. Eugene Lipov, I am so honored to have you here. He is a complex anesthesiologist and has been called the Einstein of modern anesthesiology. I absolutely love that. Your discovery and innovation, the Dual Sympathetic Reset, DSR, was endorsed by President Obama in 2010. And your research has an 85 to 90% success rate in reducing the effects of trauma. And Jamie, you are an artist, a multimedia consultant, and iconist. And your passion is to teach the science of art of obviousness and the economics of attention, helping professionals change agents, artists, and businesses confidently and at will make their message, and their brand and ideas stand out to their desired audiences. So thank you very much for joining me here today. Jamie, you've worked with some of the most leading companies in the world like Nike, Adidas, Intel, which is very, very incredibly impressive. Today, we're going to stay in line with the theme of surviving trauma stories of hope, and we are going to talk about trauma and how we can navigate the aftermath of trauma by essentially resetting our nervous system. And I think, Dr. Eugene Lipov, I would like to start with you and ask that question. After an instigating event that we experience as traumatic in our lives, and our nervous system has been impacted by it, is it in fact possible to reset the nervous system to the way it used to be?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. So let me give you a little more detail about that. So there is different parts of the nervous system. There is autonomic nervous system, which is sympathetic, parasympathetic, which is kind of the base of everything. So when you're running from the tiger, your fight and flight system is on full force. And when you're hopefully survive from the tiger, when you're sitting down, you can now digest and do other things. That's the opposite. So the part that I have particular expertise on is sympathetic nervous system or fight or flight system. So when an event happens or a series of multiple events happen, even small, but they can add up to a big event. What it does is overactivates sympathetic system or fight and flight system, and it can get stuck on that position. That involves extra nerve growth in the brain and too much norepinephrine. So as long as that persists, people who have symptoms of PTSD, or the term I prefer to use is PTSI, post-traumatic stress injury, because it's a biological change in the brain. And then as an anesthesiologist, pain physician, I'm used to calming down sympathetic system by doing an injection in the neck where we can calm down the nerves, sympathetic nerves. So when we do that, I call it DSR, it's called Dual Sympathetic Reset. So we're resetting the fight and flight system to the baseline. And it seems to reverse the symptoms of PTSD, PTSI to the pre-trauma state, gives a person an opportunity to get back in life, do psychotherapy, and really function much better.
If you want, Marlene, I can give my layman's version of that.
Absolutely, Jamie. Yes, go ahead.
I thought he did a very good job there describing what happens. You either have a blunt force trauma, or what happens common. I mean, I grew up in poverty, and when you grow up in poverty, you're basically under a constant stress, whether it's paying your bills, getting your food, taking care of your family, your car breaks down, you get a ticket. Like a minor expense to most people could be crippling for you for weeks or months. And so you're kind of constantly taking this. That's why they call it a struggle to be poor, right?
Yeah.
So there's two things that can cause when you have a near-death experience, or you spin your car out of control, or something happens where you slip. Your amygdala sends a signal to these nerves in the side of your neck, which is the stellate ganglion nerves, which is your sympathetic nervous system. Dr. Lipov can explain how it runs through the body, but the system, you can kind of feel it in your neck that thing that jerks you into where you either try to survive, or you either fight a situation or you flee a situation. That's what fight or flight. Okay, so blunt force trauma can cause that. War, having someone killed in front of you, just the drama of war, a sexual assault. But the other thing that can cause that to happen is to carry an extreme amount of stress over a long period of time. In the military, they call this operator syndrome, and there's 7 or 8 symptoms, right? Okay. So what happens is your body is Dr. Lipov so eloquently described, your body gets stuck in fight or flight. You get stuck in that, like literally like the U2 song, you get biologically stuck in the moment.
Yes.
Okay. And it's a broken leg you can't see. And there's nothing you can do outside of resetting the system that's going to relieve it. So people do all sorts of things to try to regulate their nervous system. Some of them are healthy, like yoga or breath work or running or going into nature. And some of them are unhealthy, like drugs and alcohol. But all you're seeing is people trying to regulate the nervous system. What Dr. Lipov's staggering innovation does is it allows you to bring the nervous system back to the pre-trauma state, so you're just a person. But if you don't do that and it's stuck, it doesn't matter how much yoga you do, you're basically mitigating, you're band-aiding yourself every day, which is a struggle. So when you're stuck, I like to, this is a crude example that I'm sure Dr. Lipov won't like, but the signal basically reverses, okay? Rather than you get this signal that jars you, you're basically 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. You're feeling like you could be killed or that there's a threat.
Yes.
Right? So you're acting as if you're under threat all the time. And if you're like at home with your kids or your wife or you're with your girlfriend or your boyfriend or whatever's going on, a person that's under threat all the time because of a biological lie in their body is not a very nice person to be around. So in this simple, safe, outpatient procedure over 1 or 2 days, about 20 minutes a day, it takes about 15 minutes. You can go back to your life and just be a person. And basically he turns off those nerves. They reboot 15 minutes later, and when they reboot, they come back to the pre-trauma state. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If I may, there are 2 things that
Yes.
I'd like to comment on. So number one, so let's talk about the term for a second, PTSD. So the term PTSD was introduced in 1980. So Dr. Ogberg very famous psychiatrist who came up with the term of Stockholm syndrome, came up with the term PTSI. And he and I had become very close friends over that. So when Jamie said it's an invisible wound, so I really don't quite agree with that, because people call it invisible wound. My answer to that is, if you have the wrong scanner, it's invisible. If you got the right scanner, like functional MRI, PET scan, you can actually see an amygdala overactive. I think Jamie's description was actually great, as far as I think he describes sympathetic overactivation well, because I always say, if your sympathetic system ain't happy, nobody's happy. You're always revved, right? You can never find comfort. That leads to some of the symptoms of that, as he was saying. It could be, yoga can help you a little bit, but like alcohol, heroin, whatever, they all do the same thing. You kind of calm yourself down. Unfortunately, it's a very ineffective way of doing it. And if the easiest way to, I think, understand what stuff that I do, think of it like a computer. When you have a computer which has hardware and software, so if you have a chip that's broken, that's hardware, it doesn't matter what kind of patch you put in the computer software, it's not going to work. So a lot of times we see tons of people who have years of psychotherapy, and it's really not effective because the hardware fight and flight system is overactive. So after the block, the psychologists really love working with us, because the patients can come down and actually participate in therapy, and it becomes much more effective. So if you fix the chip and then fix the software, then we have the best results.
Yeah, and can I comment and kind of bring that into really practical terms?
You may
what
go
that
ahead.
means for the average person. Yeah, I mean, listen, Dr. Lipov has had a staggering success in the armed forces, treating veterans, okay, and also sexual assault victims and first responders, okay, and they, if you look at like hardcore post-traumatic stress symptoms, and it's a biological injury, it's not a disorder, and that's a really important distinction, because you have billions of people, you may have billions of people that have some form of this biological injury in their body. So they're acting overactive and reactive, and they're being told they have a disorder, and when they have a physical injury to their body. That's incredibly stigmatizing, and it's the opposite of what's actually going on with them. And so it just actually makes the situation worse. So how would a person had a broken leg, Dr. Lipov likes to give this example a lot, and you walk up to them and you said, hey, look at you have broken leg disorder. Okay? You'd snap out of your broken leg disorder. It would be crazy making, because it's a biological injury, and we all make that accommodation because we can see it. Well, when you can't see it, people call it this kind of amorphous thing that is mystical, that you should just get over or be a better person. But it's just as broken as a broken leg, and as Dr. Lipov said, you can see it on a brain scan. So the way my interpretation of his work is that this is for people at the extreme, but I think 40 to 50% of the global population probably has this in their body, broken in their body. I see it as modern society has created stresses that work against our evolutionary biology. We're not designed to live in artificial boxes, and they get into another artificial box that moves to another artificial box. All the media and their terrible news that gets put at us. Modern culture puts a tremendous amount of stress on the human system that it's not used to. We had 50,000 years of human evolution, and we had nature constantly mitigating against our nervous system. We don't have that anymore. So I think upwards of 50% of the global population could have this in their body, and they don't even know it. And that's kind of what I'm bringing to the work. I believe that art is an amplifier, and you can use art to kind of take something and spread it faster, farther, and wider with art. But the real simple way to look at this is the symptoms, right? And why so why do I think that it's such a massive part of the population? And this system doesn't think. You can get it from the stress of poverty over time. You can get it from a distant father or distant parents. You can get it from not getting your emotional needs met as a child, right?
Correct.
So you have to look at the symptoms in terms of what would be happening if you were running from a tiger. Like if you were walking through the forest and a tiger jumped out at you. how would you feel in that moment? Well, you would have about 7 to 9 symptoms or feelings in that moment, and that's your fight or flight system. You're either going to attack that tiger and kill it, or you're going to run from that tiger, and you're going to be in that. You're either going to get away from it and or fight it, and that's going to last about 90 seconds. And what you're going to feel in that 90 seconds is extreme anxiety. You're going to have paranoia about the tiger winning or not getting away from the tiger. You're going to have a sense of doom, like this tiger is going to get me because it's a tiger and I'm a person. You're going to be hyper vigilant. You're going to be completely overly active in your mind to survive the tiger. You're going to be hyper aroused. You're not going to be able to sleep if there's a tiger chasing you. All these guys that come back from war, a huge percentage of them, something like 25%, have an ED. You can't have sex if you're running from a tiger. You're incredibly reactive. You have a hair trigger because you're just electrified trying to survive the tiger. And in extreme cases in the military where people are trained to protect, ultimate flight, if you're living with all those things all the time, we're meant to live in that heightened state in that extreme way for about 90 seconds. So if you're living that way 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, 7 days a week, it's unbearable. So in extreme cases, when in the military where people are trained to protect, ultimate flight is suicide. And in the neighborhoods where I grew up and violence is a little more acceptable or life is cheaper, ultimate fight is violent aggression or homicide, right? So what I just said accounts for about 80% of the human mental ills that we're all trying to deal with through, whether it be through meditation, yoga, psychotherapy, psilocybin, drugs and alcohol, however you're doing it. And all those things are masks. All those things are Band-Aids. What Dr. Lipov, I think that Dr. Lipov's innovation, I compare it to I say it's the most important medical innovation since the discovery of penicillin in 1928, and maybe the most important human innovation since the moon landing. If 40 to 50% of the global population has trauma, we're talking about 3 billion people.
Yeah.
And that means we either have it in ourselves, 1 out of 2 of us, or we're dealing with 50 to 100 people that have it.
Yeah.
And so no one gets out alive. This is a problem affecting all of us.
Yes.
And anything that you're doing to make your life better, whether it's yoga or, as Dr. Lipov said, psychotherapy, if you need to reset your nervous system first, so that and then those things are going to be far more effective and far more better towards you. And they're not really going to work if you have a broken leg you can't see, if you have a nervous system that's stuck in fight or flight.
That was very insightful, Jamie. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that post-COVID, I can agree with you that we've seen that the world has experienced a huge traumatic event, right? And we've also learned that through just COVID in itself, that, the experience of a traumatic event is so much more than just the loss of a loved one or an instigating event like a sexual assault or a motor vehicle accident or growing up in poverty. But it's so much more than that. And I think, that we've seen through the pandemic and post-pandemic that so many more people have this awareness of the experiences that they've had that are traumatic, whatever the instigating event may have been for them, whether it was that tiger or, whether it was something else. But I think, what I find fascinating being a PTSD survivor myself from, like I mentioned, rape and attempted murder, is that state of being afterward that you've so beautifully described is such a heightened state that we live in and we can't get out of because of that sympathetic state that we remain in, that fight and flight. And if we move that and say that it's beyond only, violent incidents, but that it is this consistent living in a state of being that is heightened, like in the sympathetic state, fight and flight, whether it be being in a marriage or an abusive relationships and walking on eggshells every day, and then going to work to a boss and being deeply unhappy at work, that state in itself is incredibly unhealthy. So the question that I have is, if such a large proportion of our population of the world is living in this state. How do we give the access to everyone to be able to control the nervous system and have it calm down? I mean, what is the global solution for everyone to be able to access this? Because for me, certainly, I had to go to all of the usual, psychotherapy, work with psychiatrists, sexologists, and the like. But none of them gave this innovation of Dr. Lipov's as an option. And had I known this was out there, it would have been. So how do we now get this solution out to the world?
I can give you an answer to that. So the first thing, to do anything like that, you need to have the will, meaning people need to believe it. And we're working very hard to have as much sciencey stuff to prove it, like Jamie would say, I think, so people, so the docs believe it. So I have had, since the beginning of this journey, that has been approximately 18 years, I've had a problem of credulity. It's hard to believe that something that simple could be so effective. So we're getting there. Currently, there's a big study being done in NYU, where we're using brain scans before and after the procedure, DSR, and hopefully when it comes out, probably in 2 years, it'll be much more obvious that this is a viable, highly therapeutically effective modality, assuming that happens. So I am Chief Medical Officer of Stella Center. So we are an international company. Actually, we have 35 sites in United States, and we also have a site in Israel, and we have three sites in Australia. Potentially, that is our plan, is to expand internationally, and then a little bit further down is one of my dreams. Is one of the things our company may be able to produce would be robotic ways to do this. So there is potentially medical robotic way of doing it on a large scale, like Mercy ships coming in, and we can treat 10,000, 20,000 people per ship per day. So you can actually do significant interventions. I mean, it's going to take time, obviously. I think the first thing is acceptance. We are actually well on our way to becoming a more nationally and internationally accepted company. That's going to take us some time to get there. But it is, theoretically, at least, it's definitely possible in modern age of technology to make it available to everybody who needs it. So yes, there is definitely, at least in my head, there is definitely a plan how to make it available. Let's say if you want to treat 3 billion people, can it be done? Absolutely. It takes will and it takes money.
I would love to comment. On that. Okay. Yeah. I mean, first of all, when I first met Dr. Lipov under incredible circumstances during COVID, and he kind of, in a 3-hour dinner conversation, he kind of laid out all the science and social aspects of it for me. I mean, it would probably take another 6 months before I would fully wrap my head around it.
I can imagine.
But when he explained it to me, I said, one of the first things I ever said to him was, what's your dreams with? What's your dream? Like, what would be the ultimate victory of this innovation? So that people don't have to be stuck on psychotropic drugs, medical drugs, or drugs and alcohol. Like they can regulate themselves because their system has been reset. What's your dream for that? And he said mercy ships that travel the world, that give this treatment to everyone, whether or not they can afford it. Okay. Just to back up a second, we have a book that just came out called The Invisible Machine that describes this innovation in relation to all the other things that exist in the world so that you can understand yourself better. When we first sat down with the editor at the publisher, they asked us, what do you want the takeaway from this book to be? And I had kind of two takeaways in my mind. One was I wanted people to see this as something that everyday people that this is for everyone, not just first responders who are important. People at the extreme, a lot of times they find Dr. Lipov.
Yeah.
Okay, because they're desperate to find him. So they will find him. but there's all these regular people out there, billions that don't think they had trauma because they know they have all the symptoms I just named, but nothing bad happened to them other than their father never talked to them, or their mother, died when they were young or something, and they don't understand that put a stress on them that has been so early in their life for so long that they just think it's a part of them, but they recognize all the symptoms that I just said. So basically, what we're saying is that if you go to war, or have a sexual assault, this system can't think. You get it from two ways: blunt force trauma or prolonged allostatic load. All allostatic load means is chronic stress. Okay. So the other takeaway, the most important thing that I think this book does, that I think we've done better maybe than anyone, that I'm most proud of in this book, outside of, is I think we make the case. I don't think anyone could read this book and not understand trauma purely as a biological injury. If that's all you walked away, say you walked away from the book and you didn't know how to get the innovation, whatever, but you can't read this book and not know with certainty for the rest of your life that trauma is a biological injury. Okay.
If I may interact there. So what Jamie is referring to is psychological trauma, not physical blunt force being shot in the head.
Yeah.
We're talking about, right? So trauma, there is trauma. I used to be a trauma surgeon, right? People came in, no leg, things like that, right? So that's different trauma. We're talking about trauma where you don't have to be touched. You can be on a patrol, half your troop gets killed. You have no physical trauma, but you relive that in your mind every day. It's a biological change that is measurable and reversible.
It's a biological injury that's resettable.
Right.
Correct. And it's diagnosable. Number one, it's not like it's just weakness of the soul and all of that crazy stuff that people use. And number two, to me, the most exciting fact about this book for me is that there is hope.
There is.
So without hope, there's no life, right? So if you go, hey, I have something going on in my head that's real. It's not because I'm a woman or because I'm this, I'm that, whatever the term you want to use to minimize yourself that people use. No, that's not it. There is a change in the brain that is real, and I'm going to get treated successfully, whatever it takes, and I'm going to feel better. I think that to me is, as a clinician, that's like the essence of the book.
Yeah,
everything else, that's the essence.
I agree. And just to speak further to your question, Marlene, about how people can get this, the only reason I went on this adventure with Dr. Lipov, last 2 years of my life, it's been quite an adventure. And I had a lot going on before we met, and I dropped a lot of projects to work on this because it was so important. Is because before I met him, a year or two before I met him, he had teamed up with a private equity firm in Chicago. And they decided to make a company 10 years ago, this thing was 70% effective. Now, with all the modern protocols that Dr. Lipov has developed and shared with other doctors and who have shared with him, it's 85 to 90% effective.
Yeah.
Okay. That is Nobel Prize winning work in terms of its effect on people, the individual, and the culture. It may be the most Nobel Prize worthy innovation of the last 100 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Just in terms of what it does. But these guys, Dr. Lipov and the Stella Center, they decided that they were going to open up clinics all over the world. So they've already opened up 35 clinics in the United States. They've got Israel, Australia, and they will be opening up clinics in South Africa. They will be opening up. We will see clinics in Africa.
Yeah.
Okay. Right now, you can come to the United States, this is relatively inexpensive. Also, Dr. Lipov is associated with a nonprofit, a foundation called Erase PTSD Now, and they fund hundreds of people to get this for free, right? So, it's insurance is not covering it right now, but it's not super expensive compared to other things, right? I think it's $2,000 to $3,000, and then there's ways to get scholarship or help or support. You can finance it, but just think about that. People say, okay, well, insurance isn't covering it. That comes up a lot. That's going to change when this NYU study comes out. And the U.S. military has studied this more than anyone, and the U.S. military is probably doing 15,000 to 20,000 of these a year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when you look at $2,000 to $3,000, well, what are people spending on drugs, alcohol, psychotherapy, all these things just to get by? And they're miserable because they need to do that just to get by every day, and they can't really live, right? So if you amortize $2,000 to $3,000 over a lifetime, you're able to experience joy. You're able to experience your children. You're able to, even if you had to pay off $3,000 over your entire life. And again, you can through the foundation or ACE-PTSD Now, they scholarship tons of people to get this for free. We're talking about pennies a day to have your life back. And so the cost of it is exceedingly accessible, and I'm so appreciative that Stella Center and Dr. Lipov have teamed up to bring this to the world, right? Because I would not, had they not done that, I would have not been interested in this project, because why would I go out and we write a book about something that changes your life, that changes the way that you'll never read this book. If you read this book, you'll never see a person that's acting strangely again and not see a biological injury. Okay.
And this treatment, James.
So because now people can get, so anyway, yeah.
So, Dr. Lipov, I just wanted to confirm again for the listeners. So the treatment, it's perhaps you could describe it to us. It's a one-day treatment. Do you need to stay in hospital? Do you just go in a morning? Is it a day procedure? It's just one injection. Could you describe the actual treatment to us?
Yeah, sure. So basically the way it's done is patient comes in, everything's outpatient. We do not keep people in hospitals. So everybody gets an IV, which is a tube in the arm. That's for safety. Mm-hmm. So 3/4 of the people, we put them asleep. They would like, a lot of people, they really don't want to have a procedure done that they feel. About 1/4 of people do it on the local. It's no more painful than, let's say, a dental procedure. So we numb up the skin, place the needle. We use ultrasound, at least I use ultrasound, to put a needle in the right position. So
in the neck, right?
Correct. Thank you.
Yeah.
In the neck. Okay. Essentially, we numb up the skin.
I know. Yeah. Sorry.
Place the needle in the neck with using ultrasound guidance, and then the whole procedure, in my hands, takes 5-7 minutes, and we're done. The patient recovers. We give them cookies, and they go rest. If they feel great, then we can stop. If they don't have an improvement, then we do the other side. You cannot do both sides at the same time. It's too much anesthetic at the same day. So that's why there is interval, to make sure the anesthetic gets out of the system. But the key component to that is, again, the procedure is very quick. It's usually not uncomfortable. A lot of people are asleep to it. Some people, it just feels weird having a needle put in the neck, right? But that's about it. Was that clear?
And what is the science, Dr. Lipov, that happens through the procedure internally?
So what does it really do, is your question, right? So your question is, how does it work? Is that correct?
Yeah. What happens internally?
Sure.
Once you place the needle, you inject.
Great question.
What happens physiologically in the body to actually reset the nervous system?
So let me give you a complete answer to that. So in order to understand that, you need to understand what PTSD or PTSI is. So when a traumatic event happens, whatever it is, multiple events, the first thing that happens in the brain is NGF, nerve growth factor, is being produced in the brain. And that substance travels from the brain. There is a connection from sympathetic ganglia here to the brain.
In the neck?
Yes, Jamie, in the neck. I'm showing the neck.
Well, I don't know if people are watching this or if they're listening to this.
Fair enough. So we're talking about sympathetic system nerves in the neck only. There are other sympathetic nerves, we're ignoring those. So anyway, event happens, and then NGF, nerve growth factor, gets transmitted from the transfer from the brain through the nerves, from the brain to the sympathetic nerves in the neck. Once NGF, nerve growth factor, it's called neurotropin, makes things grow, hits the sympathetic ganglia in the neck, it promotes sympathetic nerve growth, fight and flight nerves growth in the brain, actually. That's been shown in the rat model. So once that happens, let's say normal amount of sympathetic nerve fibers in the brain is 4, let's assume. And now after this happened, now you got 8. So you have increased amount. That's called sprouting. So think of it like leaves growing.
Yes.
And as long as NGF is in the neck, that persists. Again, as long as you have an increased amount of sympathetic nerve fibers, that secretes norepinephrine. So norepinephrine is like adrenaline. So if you take a fluid around the brain, it's called CSF, from a soldier with PTSD or PTSI, that amount of norepinephrine is twice as high. So we know it happens in the human model, right? So again,
so
as long as
that then what is also, Dr. Lipov, is sorry to interrupt you, but is that also what they refer to as a chemical imbalance in the brain?
Chemical
because
imbalance,
there's the sprouting.
There's no science behind chemical imbalances. It's all.
If I may, so let me do the sciencey stuff.
Okay.
So when people talk about chemical imbalance, that's more of a psychiatric perspective. When they talk about serotonin, dopamine imbalance, because the idea behind the pills is to increase the serotonin level, makes you happy. That's the thought.
I see.
We are talking about a different system. So the system that I'm talking about is much more basic. And we're talking about one transmitter, norepinephrine. The beautiful part about what I do when I do an injection in the neck, I'm isolating one system only. When you take a pill and it's supposed to take serotonin, it also affects norepinephrine. It has a lot of other effects. So that'd be a no, I would say. But anyway, back to the thing. So as long as the state persists I described, people will have symptoms of PTSD or PTSI. Once we put a needle in the neck, nowhere else in the neck, what it does is does two things. Number one, it immediately stops the secretion of norepinephrine. So norepinephrine level drops immediately. So in about 5 to 7 minutes, norepinephrine levels go to the normal state. So when people leave the procedure room and the recovery room, they go, I feel relaxed, I feel calm, because there was an acute change of norepinephrine. That's one. Two, for whatever the reason, if you're interested in details and sciencey stuff, you can read my paper in 2009. But if you put local anesthetic onto the ganglia, sympathetic ganglia, which is a collection of the nerves in the neck, it turns off the NGF, nerve growth factor. So nerve growth factor drops. Once that happens, the extra nerves, remember they use 8 nerves, goes back to the normal amount, which is, let's say, 4.
The 4.
Right. So that's called pruning. Think of the leaves being pruned off. So now when local anesthetic wears off, which lasts about 8 hours, those extra nerves are now no longer active. So it doesn't kick out as much norepinephrine. So a procedure that lasts 8 hours, local anesthetic effect lasts 8 hours, numbing it up, impact could last for years. The longest outlier right now is 17 years. He had 2 injections. He's still doing well.
Good.
Yeah, and then one factor that I think is really interesting, Marlene, is that the right side is normally associated with trauma, either prolonged allostatic load or stress that happens when you're an adult. And the left side, I always do the left side the next day because you can only do one side per day, is associated with childhood trauma. So people that have childhood trauma typically need to come back the second day, and that's where they get their major day of relief.
Okay. So, and then how long does it last from the time that you receive the treatment? Is it something that you have to come back with ongoing over your lifetime?
Well, I'm going to give you, there are a couple of answers. There are 3. That's a very common question, of course. There are 3 answers to that. Number one, it depends on your genetics. In fact, you can pass trauma down generations to make you more susceptible to PTSD. So genetics is number one. Number 2, it depends what you do following the procedure. Do you see a psychotherapist, trauma-informed? Do you do yoga? Do you cut down the use of substances of various kinds? And number 3, it depends what happens. So life happens. We took care of, let's say, a policeman, one of the examples I gave you. He was doing great for a year. And then he had to shoot an adult in the line of duty, and I flipped him back. So those are the three things. So it can last for years. Again, the longest outlier is 17 years. He was special forces guy from Illinois. And it can last for many, many years. And then the great thing about it, I mean, if they do, people ask me, it's like, when is it time to come back? That's a very common question I get. So my usual answer is, if you have a spouse or somebody around you, they will tell you. If your behavior becoming, again, you're being short, your temper is getting bad, you're not sleeping right. Sometimes people cannot see it in themselves, but the spouses usually can tell pretty quickly it's time to return for a tune-up. And the cool thing about it is we're using bupivacaine. Bupivacaine is a drug that's been used since the 70s on pregnant women. So it's safe. It's not a steroid. It doesn't affect your kidneys, doesn't do this, doesn't do that. And it's not a psychotropic. It's a totally different system.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Jamie, I wanted to ask you just on what Dr. Lipov has said, and he's mentioned some of the examples. So there are many people who, like you've mentioned earlier, who are not aware of the fact that they, in fact, are suffering from trauma because they didn't have that one instigating event that they could pinpoint this on. So what should they be looking out for?
It's such a great question. There was an aha moment. I was speaking at Fort Bragg for my previous book, which is an art and communications book, when I first went to work with the military. And I was very leery of it because I'm leery of the military. I'm leery of U.S. foreign policy. I didn't really want to be involved with the military when I first got the offer to speak there. But I eventually saw it a different way, and I'm really, really glad that I went. Okay. But when I was after one of these post-traumatic stress meetings one day, a guy named Jeff Dardia, who runs the Health Initiative Task Force at Fort Bragg, called me over and he asked me if I'd heard of a thing called operator syndrome. And I never heard of it. And he held up the symptoms, which were the symptoms I said earlier: anxiety, paranoia, doom, vigilance, reactivity, sleep. And when I saw it, that moment kind of changed my life, because I didn't see soldiers. I saw the neighborhoods where I grew up. I saw Mexican immigrants. Right. And so my mind started racing. Like, could this be that people just under stress for a long time for what even this system can't think? So even if it's like your father's away a lot, so kids take everything personally, and that becomes this massive stress. You can have the same biological injury as someone coming from Afghanistan, like it just started or someone that has the stress of poverty. So that started kind of going on in my mind. And to answer your question, Marlene, I think we have to go back to what Dr. Lipov was saying about a chemical imbalance versus his system. Okay. What's going on in people, the chemical imbalance stuff is all speculative. Okay. What's really going on in people, Dr. Lipov can't really say this because he's a scientist and I'm not. And so his opinion has to be, I probably, because I'm not a scientist, I can probably be less careful in telling the truth. Okay. The reality is that, the reality is that chemical imbalance stuff is primarily pseudoscience, and that what's going on in people, 99% of people, is an overactive sympathetic nervous system. That's what's happening. He won't say that, but that is what's happening.
Well, we don't know all the details, but there is some evidence about dopaminergic system. I mean, and serotonin. There is some evidence, but I'm not. This is not my space. So
I get it.
I'll leave it to your opinion on that one.
Okay. But let me. What it really comes back to, Marlene, is the book. Okay. Yeah. I don't think there's a book, and I'm not saying this because I co-wrote it with Dr. Lipov, right? We also brought in this staggeringly talented collaborative writer named Holly Lawrence, who's a subject matter expert in false incarceration and post-traumatic stress. She was our collaborative writer on this book and our partner. So I'm not taking this as personal credit, because, I didn't invent this. And Holly Lawrence is a genius that helped make all this book work, like helped figure out how my life colliding with Dr. Lipov's work, how that could work in a story. It's a really beautiful book to read in terms of stories and the balance of stories and science. It reads like a novel. Okay. But I don't think there's ever been a book better written to help people understand what's going on inside themselves if they're feeling any of the symptoms that I just understood or I just explained. If they've had trauma or they've carried prolonged stress. The Invisible Machine by Dr. Eugene Lipov and Jamie Mustard. I think if you want to know what's going on inside yourself, that book, you can't read that book and not have a better understanding of what's going on inside yourself than any other book ever written on the subject of how does that injury result to all the other modalities in the world? How does it relate to my brain health? How does it relate to psilocybin? We explain all that in a way that I just don't think has ever been explained before.
So
ultimately, I want people to know what's going on inside themselves, because just knowing is going to change your life. If you know, if you have the correct breakdown of the balance of things going inside you, just that is going to, you're no longer going to stigmatize yourself as crazy. You're not going to stigmatize your husband or your child as crazy. That just the knowing from reading the book is going to transform your life. And then there's a path. Like Dr. Lipov said, I mean, he said the most profound thing you could possibly say, right? The most important thing, more than anything, is hope, right? So you read this book, it's the truth, okay? You're going to have hope because you're going to know what's actually going on. And just hope will transform your life, and then you have a path.
And I love the subtitle of your book, and I think you when you wrote this book, you wrote it to the subtitle, "The Startling Truth About Trauma and the Scientific Breakthrough That Can Transform Your Life." And that's what you're saying, that all of this information, which is a beautiful blend of personal stories and research and data, to form this beautiful tapestry that can really inform people's lives and educate them and expand their knowledge on their own circumstances and behavior, is incredible. So thank you.
Can I say one more personal thing on that?
Of course. Of course.
Before I met Dr. Lipov and I did this procedure, I had a lot of judgment. I grew up around a lot of addicts. I had judgment towards addicts. How come they couldn't get it together and I could? I had all this judgment around. If people were crazy, I had judgment. After getting the procedure myself and it transforming my life, okay, because I'm not fighting myself all the time just to exist. Me, it was about getting successful and still having something feeling way wrong. And it was the search to figure out what that was where I stumbled across Dr. Lipov's work, and I figured out, okay, that's what's wrong, is I have a biological injury to my body. Now when I see people that are acting in weird ways or they're addicted or whatever, I see that they have a physical injury, a broken leg you can't see. So all I feel is compassion. It's completely changed the way that I interpret the world.
So one thing, just today is actually an interesting day for us. Our audiobook came out today. Can you show our actually book cover? It's beautiful.
I can. I know I have.
And I have to run. I'm very sorry. You can compare with Jamie if you like.
No, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Lipov. I think let's wait for Jamie and find that book cover. Thank you. I enjoyed so much our conversation today, Dr. Lipov. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yes, I do have a copy of your book. It's a book that definitely will change the way that we think about innovation when it comes to trauma. And it's a book that's long overdue in this world. Dr. Lipov, I wish you all the best with your research and your rollout. This is something that is innovative, something that the world needs. And as a PTSD survivor, I'm really happy that we have people like you in the world. Like Jamie said, that does the research, Nobel Prize worth of research that can help so many. Thank you. You're welcome. Bye.
Yeah, I can stay on if you want. Yeah.
The only thing Jamie and I, we're gonna finish up on, is where we can find the book. I think it's on Amazon, if I'm not mistaken. I'm going to actually put the links in the show notes so that the audience can
the book is
find
on Amazon. In North America, it's in every bookstore. You can get it at every Barnes and Noble. So it's available where all books are sold, as they say. And then the audiobook just came out today. The audio and the Kindle is, $10. And, if you can't afford the book, and I hope you can, you can go to dreugenelipov.com, dreugenelipov.com, and there's tremendous resources there in terms of understanding this. You can also go to stellacenter.com, and there's a quiz and tremendous resources there. So that's another place you can go. But yeah, it's out today, and the audiobook came out today, and I couldn't be, more excited.
Congratulations. What an achievement.
Thank you.
Do you have any last words that you want to leave the audience with?
I'll just repeat what the drum beat that I've been saying, which is trauma, psychological trauma is 100% a biological injury. And getting an understanding of that will change the way and improve the way that you see and move through the world.
Thank you. Those are wise words, and very important for us to know, to make that distinction between psychological trauma that can also be biological trauma in the body. So thank you so much for joining me today, Jamie. And it's been wonderful and enlightening talking to you, and all the success and best wishes with book sales and your book promotion.
Thank you, Marlene. It was a beautiful interview, just a beautiful conversation. I almost forgot it was an interview. It just felt like we were talking. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
That wraps up this podcast episode. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy my podcast, please take a minute to give me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. Please subscribe in your favorite podcast directory so you don't miss an episode. Please consider following My Centered Life on Facebook and Instagram for daily inspiration. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. You can catch me again in the next episode. Same time, same place. Sending you lots of love and light. Bye.